Hey everybody, this is Dominic DeAngelo of WrestleZone.com. Today's date is September 24th, 2020, and I'm happy to have with me here today Lavie Margolin, the author of TrumpMania, Vince McMahon, WWE, and the Making of America's 45th President. The 2020 election edition is just released now. Is that correct, Lavie? It's out right now, right?
I just picked up a copy for myself from the mail just an hour ago, so I haven't let go of it. I'm still carrying it around the house.
How about that? That's great. So let's start off with this. Just first off, just how did you become a fan of wrestling, and then also how did an interest in politics come about for you as well?
Sure. So, wrestling fandom was actually, coincidentally enough, it came about at basically the start of this book, or very early on. The One of my favorite angles, and I think most remembered from the 80s or 90s, was when the Mega Powers, before they collided, when they broke apart. So it was big match from the main event: Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage, of course, against the Twin Powers, and Akeem falls on Miss Elizabeth. Hulk Hogan goes on the back to check on her. Macho Man is left to fend for himself, gets beaten up, and then goes to the back and is so angry. He accuses Hulk Hogan of having, jealous eyes, and this is the inception of the big WrestleMania 5 match that took place in Atlantic City, of course. Now, politics is a more recent story because I was somebody that I didn't even waste my time voting, quote unquote. Really, when I became super active in following politics was the fascination with Donald Trump. Many people compare it to sort of pro wrestling at its most engaging period when he would say crazy things, and in the early Republican debates in 2016, I would watch with fascination. It didn't seem real, like he could really win, but it was just so entertaining that I couldn't look away.
I was the same way, man. I remember just watching and him just like pretty much eviscerating everybody that was on the Republican side of that was the candidates there, and I was never a Trump fan, and I was like, what was. And I always thought too beforehand, like, what's the big interest in this guy? He's just like some mogul that is now a game show host essentially. But you can't deny that he's got a charisma about him that's people obviously got attracted to. Yeah, just how in regards to the book too. What is that like making that connection of wrestling and politics? Is that how it initially all got started for you too? Like, was it when he won the election and we were like, you know what, I could write a book about this?
So it's been two times. I want to say, like Booker T, you'd say two times, but it's been a cathartic experience actually twice for me. Somewhat unfortunately because of the world situation. So for me and my family, Trump winning was very upsetting. We didn't know what would happen. Some of it we didn't even predict how bad it would get. In certain ways, we thought it would be different. Certainly, you couldn't predict this. So when he won the election, we were sort of like walking around with our heads held low. And I went to a friend's house, and he's not the type of person that gets excited about much, at least that I have to say. But I was telling him about, I've written career books before on interviewing. It's just sharing some projects I was thinking about. I was like, by the way, I've been thinking about a book kind of talking about how Trump has been involved in nothing. He's like, wait, stop everything. This is the book. You have to do this one. I was like, this one? So he actually got me really excited about it. But at the time, I was just starting to follow politics more. So, to better understand the situation, following the news, kind of figuring out what I wanted to follow was an important thing. And I wasn't as informed. So it really leaned heavily on the wrestling side. But speed up 3 years later, the idea of doing a newer version was on my mind, especially with a podcast plan for a while, but certainly just before the coronavirus hit, it was something that I really planned to do. But when it hit, that was actually something that I would spend my evenings doing. Something to look forward to, and think about in 6 months I'll have this product rather than each day feeling the same. And in those 3 years, actually, thanks to people like you and other connections on Twitter, I just became better at research, at journalism, at understanding things, and I was able to apply those skills to the revised book. So not only was it 3 years forward in the story, but actually backwards, it's much more informed politically. I looked more at Jesse Ventura from becoming the mayor all the way through the governor and beyond. I look at Linda McMahon's two campaigns and how they relate. So it's the book is 50% larger than the original, but about 65% different.
Oh wow, how about that? So did you actually go back to and like make some edits or like add certain stuff in certain areas that like so say if since I read the previous copy and reviewed it, if I were to go through the new edition of this, is a lot of it just read different or did you like just implement certain things throughout it?
So it reads smoother, and part of it is learning from others. So one of the funny things that emerged from the first book is probably similar to the Wrestling Observer, where people have issue when you sort of use wrestlers' first names. Somebody wrote me a review on Amazon that made me laugh, where they said I was almost had a fetish about using real names because I use them so much in the book. So in this book, I sort of let you know the real name and then kind of stopped, like just move forward with the name you'd be familiar with.
Yeah.
But the structure is somewhat the same in terms of like the bones, but the meat on the body is much more built out. And then there's huge swaths of area that were only like touched on very lightly before, and now I'm so much more informed about it, like Linda McMahon's two campaigns or Jesse Ventura, even for mayor, that's expanded, and even learning about political operatives that were huge pro wrestling fans, and finding little tidbits that are just fun along the way. That's the best part for me.
Oh, that's pretty awesome too, because that's an aspect I really did like about it was like just a little asides that maybe I wasn't aware of, or that even just your casual wrestling fan weren't aware of either. I thought that was a really neat aspect, and hey, I kind of like even just from an outsider perspective of like, okay, if I didn't know crap about wrestling. I appreciated learning the people's real names. Although I knew them, I was like, oh, it's a good aspect of it. So I don't know. I don't know why people give you a hard time. In regards to, so it's kind of funny because when I would explain this book to people that were non-wrestling fans, and I would be like, "Oh yeah, I read this book, TrumpMania, and it talks about how Donald Trump how his like win of the 2016 election kind of was influenced by wrestling," and they'd be like, "What?" or like, "What are you talking about?" So how would you describe this to like a non-wrestling fan? How would you pitch this book to a non-wrestling fan that would kind of think that maybe this whole connection is kind of like a ridiculous concept, even though wrestling fans kind of do get it?
Sure. In my other professional life, I just happened to be talking to a journalist today who has a long history at the New York Times. That sounds exciting, right?
Yeah,
But
really.
it just happened today that I name dropped the book, and she wants to know more. So the first concept that I like to explain about this whole world is that if you're if you're of the position that what a lot of Donald Trump says are untruth, or sort of a perverted look at reality, you have to understand it through the lens of professional wrestling. In professional wrestling, it's not about what's real and what's fake, truth. And lies. It's about what does the audience want to hear, and you're delivering a message that the audience wants delivered. The audience wants to receive that message, and even though it's not based in reality, everyone is happy. So that's sort of like one pillar, understanding the political world that we're in now, if you're of those beliefs. The second is just to understand this long relationship between Trump and the McMahon, because WWE often doesn't get mainstream press, or if it does, it's sort of an extreme. It's either very negative after a terrible tragedy or early death, or it's very positive as sort of a puff piece. Hey, WWE is coming to Pittsburgh. They're great with kids and families, have fun, but there's not really a lot of depth in the middle. So that's where sort of you can look at this long-term trajectory over 32, 33 years and really understand that, and how it's even influencing it now with Linda McMahon in a key role as a fundraiser for Trump.
Yeah, I think it's having all that too, and keeping that in consideration of just like the art of wrestling and the art of promotion and self promotion. And Trump has, like, through his words and what he says, whether you believe in what he says or like you think it's all garbage, it's like it engages a person in negatively or positively. And so, like, he can be a heel, he can be a baby face to some people, and it's like to have that aspect certainly lends itself to the wrestling side of things. For someone who has read, like, what initially kind of, oh no, in regards to like what story out of all of them that you have researched, even up until for this 2020 edition, what story did you find to be like the most telling about Trump and his connection with wrestling and how it all kind of related to him? Is there a certain one that stands out to you that influenced Trump in winning the 2016 election?
Okay, so um, one that comes to mind immediately is sort of his patience with McMahon and his sort of, having a good relationship, which is more of like a humorous thing because for those long-time fans, you might remember the World Bodybuilding Federation.
Right.
So where was the first or second, I think the first pay-per-view held? It was held at a Trump facility. And even in WrestleMania 7, when Trump went there, if you look, much of the time on screen, he's away from his seat. He returns to his seat for the main event, but he's sort of like away. But you could see him at the World Bodybuilding Federation event, he's there. He's now with Marlon Maples. Not every event, but throughout the years, you see his different either significant other or whom he's dating. So that sort of just shows me the connection between them because the timing is very interesting also. So when Trump owned the Plaza in New York City, very historic building. For those with children, you might have heard of Eloise at the Plaza. So the first time they announced the WBF is when Trump owned the Plaza and Titan Sports rented it out to announce that. 6 months later, McMahon returns, but now to defend himself against steroid allegations. So it's sort of like indicative of their relationship.
Yeah.
So, going through these things together. Now, in terms of like getting elected, I think certainly his time as the actually it was 1 week or 8 days as the owner of Raw was a great training for him, just in terms of thinking about how to manipulate the crowd. And often when he appeared in these later appearances, money would drop from the ceiling, whether it was at the WrestleMania or as owner of Raw. And he actually says when they look back on it, I think in Raw 1000 episode, that he had that done because he wanted people to cheer him. So he's always thinking about like making the best impression, no matter like how on the nose or crass it is.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. Like I just remember his run at like that 1 week run or whatever it was, his owner of Raw, and him like getting himself over to that extent. It's crazy. I think the one of the most fascinating stories, and this is the one I always tell non-wrestling fans too, is his time at WrestleMania 29 when he got inducted in the Hall of Fame, and he saw Zeb Coulter's speech, Dutch Mantel. Talk about that aspect of that part of his influence a little bit.
Sure. So for those, just to jog your memory, We the People, Seth Coulter, Jack Swagger, and different people floating in a little bit, but they were using the "Don't Tread on Me" flag, all of these very nationalistic type of phrases. So it was sort of like on the nose as trying to be bad guys. Even the guy from InfoWars, he had sort of bashed it that they were being negative towards conservatives and so on. So it was being taken in all different ways. But for Trump attending this event in New Jersey, which I happen to have been at, both the Hall of Fame and this event, for him it was sort of like, wow, like he's saying that he hates New York now, and he says Italian or derogatory Italian. and something called Yiddish, which is for some Jewish people from Europe, it's sort of like a preferred dialect. So really negative towards people. So as the story goes, at least, Trump went backstage and he sees Deb Coulter, and he's like, he's praising him. I loved it. That was great. Sort of like misinterpreting it, and it's sort of speaking to him at the time.
Yeah. I think that's just a crazy story, like hilarious, and it's just like, oh my god, that could totally have happened. That could totally have happened. So, yeah, I found, yeah, have you gotten, in regards to that too, have you gotten negative feedback from Trump supporters from this book? Like, and can you describe some of that too a little bit if you have?
Sure. So I don't know if there was, whenever you're out there and people have negative things to say, sort of the more you're out there, the worse it gets. So I sort of take that as a positive in some sense.
Right.
But the things that came out just sort of, it wasn't so much pro-Trump. It was just like pure hate. But sometimes somebody said like, "Oh, I want to use it for toilet paper," or somebody posted the link on a website this week that has a fairly active like message board, and they actually remembered when the last book came out, even though I don't think they read either one. They're like, "This guy's trying to sell the book again," and so that made me laugh.
That's pretty funny. um, Now, have you had like what have you gotten like what kind of positive feedback have you gotten from the book in regards to people that maybe weren't in tune with wrestling as much and but more so on the political side of things? Did you get any positive feedback in that regard?
Yeah, so some of the most memorable to me was the press, and when you put something out there, you never know if it's going to be quiet or you sort of reach in different ways. So I actually put them on the new book on the back cover, indicating it was for the first book, but from the Sydney Morning Herald, right, all the way in Australia. In some ways, the book is more revealing look at the character of the American president than the more fetid Fire and Fury, which was a pretty hot book
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, looking at the president. So from that and the Dayton Daily News and Orlando Sentinel, so those were really, Sports Illustrated had something nice to say. So those are really validating to me because you never know, somebody on the internet or Twitter, but sort of like when it has to go through this process of a media platform, that's something that's memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, seeing those kind of reviews has to feel good too, and knowing that like it's reaching an outside audience that might not have necessarily been acclimated with whether it's the politic side of things or the wrestling side of things. So it's pretty cool, man. What's as far as Vince McMahon's influence? I mean, if you're a wrestling fan, you know that like Vince McMahon and Trump have that kind of obviously have that alpha male mentality of like, go big, go home slash it's my way, ruthless aggression, for lack of a better phrase. How do you feel their relationship developed over the years, and where do you think they kind of stand at right now?
So I think there's both of them in like an outward sense, right? Like we are the alpha males, we're in charge, nothing bothers us. But sort of to be the amateur psychologist, when you look at their actions and their reactions to things, they both seem very vulnerable and they need reinforcement. So, in some ways, both have been seen as successful as business people, but in other ways, they've been harshly criticized. Like, they've gotten opportunities from family, or they've made major mistakes and had to come back from them, and so on. So the two of them together actually reinforce each other. And you could see it to a ridiculous degree, on the WWE programming, like, this billionaire businessman, successful Donald Trump, he knows the art of the deal. It's sort of like they have to keep reinforcing that, among each other in order to gain confidence.
Right, right, and something that's I found pretty relatable. Well, not relatable to me, but relatable to those two is that yeah, if they get some jabs thrown at them, they'll reflect that back in certain ways that they handle themselves. So like, if Trump gets negative feedback on, whether it's the handling of the pandemic or, certain aspects of things, he'll really hammer certain aspects home of like what he's done right or what he believes is done right. While as Vince, like you look at throughout his whole span of being the CEO of WWE, anytime that slights would come against him, whether it was steroid trial or the taxes were after the IRS were after him, he'd put that into the storylines on air and everything like that. So seeing those insecurities shine through has been a certain, definitely you can see those parallels, no doubt about it. Um, so, hey, something else. Yeah, talk about just the impact of Jesse Ventura in regards to maybe Trump's campaign and anything to that aspect, and how do you see that him maybe that influencing how he kind of got motivated more into politics?
So I missed this in the first book. I mentioned Jesse Ventura and moved on.
Mm-hmm.
One of the theses of the second book is that I feel that if Jesse Ventura did not become the governor of Minnesota, Donald Trump would not be the president of the United States.
Really?
So why? So Ventura's campaign very much mimics Trump. His campaign slogan was "Retaliate in '98," and he was elected. I read this wonderful academic book that actually looked at his whole campaign. They have all the statistics and everything like that. So he actually benefited from something they called the dude vote. So what is the dude vote? That is, what some people imagine pro wrestling fans to be today, but was probably more true back then, which is males potentially disaffected from society in their 20s and 30s, earning a lower income on average, having less education on average, and so on. Sort of like aligning with the demographics and sort of speaking to them. And they're not the type of people that would normally vote because they feel sort of that isn't for them. And in Minnesota, benefiting from that because of the laws there that you can actually register to vote that day. So sort of like, talking people into the box office and selling tickets, right? You hear about like sellouts at Madison Square Garden that day.
Right.
So that was sort of the benefit of that.
Wow.
So Ventura surprised everyone, the outside candidate. He used really well to say, like, even though he was probably fairly wealthy at the time, he said he's a union member. What union? The Screen Actors Guild. So you take truth or have truth and you sort of like use them to your advantage. So it's not just a theory that Trump benefited from Ventura. Trump actually flew out to Minnesota to meet with Ventura and learn how he did it.
Wow. Was this as he was campaigning?
So this was after. So Trump has a long history of flirting with becoming president. As I open the new book with, in 1987, he first mentioned it. His editor says that it was just a ploy to sell more copies of The Art of the Deal, but that's the first mention. But it threads through. So in 2000, even he was flirting with it too. So that's when Ventura won, it was that time period, like 98 to 2000, that they discussed it together.
Oh, okay.
And what's really interesting is that there was this exchange where both of them were thinking about running for president in 2000, but so both of them were like half thinking about it for themselves and half supporting the other one because they wanted to remain like in good standing, and neither one was sure if they'd actually run. So Trump flies out there on his plane. He has reporters on the plane, and he says something like, "I think Ventura will support me, if I run." And they ask them about it in the press conference, and Donald Trump actually says, "You're from this whatever newspaper, the New York Post. That, of course, you're lying." So it's like you can see the seed sown of discontent with the media.
Yeah.
What's actually different that's interesting is that Ventura benefited from an underdog status where the media saw him with fascination, and in some ways they actually saw him as a simple person, and that simplicity they actually said made him incapable of lying. So they saw him as sort of like a pro wrestler who isn't very sophisticated, so he's just sort of like telling it from his heart as opposed to manipulation.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, how about that? That's wild. Um, I think, yeah, just the connection that all that has, like Jesse Ventura, like, because you immediately think of that too, like him being involved with politics, and then Trump just getting into it, and his relationship with McMahon. It's kind of all ties together, and that's crazy, like that they actually met up, and another connection is made in that regard. Um, Something I did want to ask too is how as the development as like the pandemic has gone on and his handling of that, and now the election coming up with Biden and that, have you seen some more kind of parallels and connections to Trump with wrestling in regards to how he's handled the process? Let's start with the pandemic and then maybe with the 2020 campaign as you've seen so far.
Sure. I think in terms of the pandemic, it's trying to shape the reality as A, you see it or want it to be seen, but B, how you feel your audience wants to see it. Um, when I think most self-affirming for him is when he has the rallies and people aren't wearing masks. And he says that it hasn't really affected anyone, even though 200,000 people are reported having died.
Right.
But his audience doesn't want to wear masks, and he sort of can play off that, the freedom to do what you want, and so on. So it's that very pro wrestling element where Vince McMahon can wrap himself in a different way, where it's sort of like, the truth or the reality as you want it to be seen.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally see that too. That's definitely one. So, how would you? And now, in regards to maybe the 2020 campaign with Biden, is there anything that you see there that stands out too?
So Trump has done a little bit of his old tactics with, saying, affirming different nicknames to Biden and saying he's confused and all those sort of things. But he probably hasn't been at his best. There hasn't been something like a lion or low energy. I think he has to work on his catchphrases. It's sort of like WWE during a down period where The Rock comes up with like boots to whatever, where it's sort of like you're trying catchphrase, but nobody really cares. It's not hitting in the
It's
right
not
place.
sticking. Yeah. I don't think Sleepy Joe is a very good name so far. I think he's got to try to dig a little deeper for something. So, no, man. Let's close it out with just maybe a Lyndon McMahon aspect of things. She has started off as the administrator of small business, right? And now she obviously stepped down from that. How has her connection been in with Trump and just her scope of having the McMahon's relationship involved with the Trump administration at this point in time?
Sure. So just briefly, Linda emerges as through the 80s and so on until the early 2000s. Linda was a good person to put out there to the public. She had, she's could be very charming and not abrasive like Vince McMahon. So there's documented aspects where she goes and talks to athletic commissions to deregulate. She's at the forefront of that. So talking to politicians and sort of getting ahead of things in that way. But then in the 2000s, she starts showing her political aspirations, and she runs for Senate twice in Connecticut and loses about $100 million. However, she gains a lot of clout in the Republican Party because she's seen as somebody that will spend money. So, having been a modest donor in the past, after she spends her own money, she starts now on herself. She starts now investing in a number of Republican causes, and through these efforts and through the friendship that the McMahons have with Trump, it's rumored a few different positions she might get in his administration, but she gets the job at the Administrative Small Business Administration, and actually, compared to everyone else, she does quite well, and she's really dedicated to it for the period she's there. She actually visits offices in all of the states. But then within a couple of years, she moves out of that role and starts to run a super PAC, which allows donations from corporations and rich individuals to not have as many restrictions as if you were giving directly to the candidate's campaign.
Right.
Who is the biggest donor to the super PAC that she runs? Herself. If you look at the total amount of dollars in her super PAC, it's pretty good. But her job was to actually get donations from the big donors to Trump last time, and not as many people have given. One of them includes Shahid Khan, the father and I believe part owner of AEW Wrestling, who's actually made billions of dollars more during the pandemic than he had before, but he has not given to Trump this time.
Wow, how about that? Dang. Jeez, it's crazy how it all ties in, man.
Yeah, I dropped that bomb at the end.
Yeah, damn. Well, cool. Is there anything else? Well, obviously you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy a paperback copy, and it's available on Kindle as well. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a Kindle edition, and for those that can't get enough, there's an 11-part series called TrumpMania that I do with John Paz. For those that listen to podcasts, he's co-hosts a number of podcasts, including with Zev Calder. So if you want to listen to that, it's taped weekly, so it's very timely. We look back at the past and we look at the present to inform the future, and we're going to go all the way through the week after the election, and hopefully by that point things will be settled. However, until it's settled, we might even have Nancy Pelosi as our president.
Oh my. Yeah, what a crazy time, man. What a just wild time in general. I'm definitely gonna have to subscribe to that podcast. I love Paz and the work he does too. So yeah, it's a 1-2 punch happening there, man. So Lavie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today and getting the details on this book. I'm excited to read the new edition and get more information about it. I think it's a real fascinating topic, even if you're just a casual wrestling fan. Just the notes and the little tidbits about Trump's ties to wrestling and everything, I think is a big hook just in general. So I think you did a very good job on the first edition, and this revised edition I'm sure is going to be even better. So thanks, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Oh, how do they follow you on Twitter?
Sure. Lavie Marg, LavieMarg. I'm on there probably way too much, so if you have something to say, just reach out. My direct messages are open.
Hey, and I think we're all on there a little too much sometimes. I can speak for myself too. You can follow WrestleZone on Twitter at WrestleZone.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Dominic DeAngelo, and go to WrestleZone.com for all your WrestleZone needs. Plus, to hear this interview, as well as plenty of other ones that we've done, you just type in WrestleZone Podcast in your podcast feed of choice, and we'll pop right up. So, all right, everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll see you later.